Commander Zethkree watched the human female through his tactical visor, mandibles clicking in what his species considered amusement. The creature stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by the finest warriors from 12 different worlds. Each fighter carried weapons that could slice through starship hulls, yet this small, pink-skinned being held only a simple metal rod. "Are you certain this is the legendary human warrior?" asked Subcommander Vextar, his 4 arms adjusting various weapons on his belt. She looked so fragile. The human's name was Sarah Chun, and her reputation preceded her across 3 star systems. Stories spoke of impossible feats, a single human destroying entire fleets, moving faster than sensor equipment could track, and surviving wounds that would kill any other species instantly. But, looking at her now, barely reaching chest height on most of the assembled warriors, those stories seemed like elaborate fiction. Sarah stood perfectly still, her weapon held loosely at her side. Her breathing was calm, steady, almost meditative. The arena's energy shields hummed to life, trapping all 13 fighters within a circular space roughly 50 meters across. The crowd of alien spectators filled thousands of seats, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, roars, and telepathic static. "Warriors of the Galactic Arena," boomed the announcer's voice through universal translators. "Today we witness something unprecedented. 12 champions face 1 human in combat to the death. Place your bets now, for this match begins in 60 seconds. The betting displays showed overwhelming odds against Sarah. 1,000 to 1 seemed generous to most observers. The Krillian champion, standing nearly 3 meters tall with natural armor plating, flexed muscles that could crush steel. The Vorthan assassin checked her plasma daggers, each one capable of cutting through any known material. The mechanical warrior from Nexus Prime ran diagnostics on weapons systems that had never failed. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 30 seconds, announced the voice. The crowd's noise reached fever pitch. Some spectators had come specifically to see the famous human die. Others hoped to witness something extraordinary, though few believed the stories could possibly be true. The arena's environmental controls adjusted for optimal viewing, and recording devices focused on every angle. 20 seconds. Sarah's grip on her weapon loosened even further. To most observers, it looked like she was about to drop it entirely. The Hellion warrior, whose species prided itself on reading combat intentions through bioelectric fields, frowned in confusion. The human's energy signature was completely calm, showing none of the pre-combat tension expected from any fighter. 10 seconds. The 12 champions took their fighting stances. Weapons powered up, muscles tensed, and predatory instincts sharpened to killing points. The arena's atmosphere crackled with anticipation and barely contained violence. 5, 4, 3, 2. Sarah opened her eyes. For just a moment, they seemed to glow with an inner light that made several spectators lean forward in their seats. "Begin." The metal rod fell from Sarah's fingers, clattering against the arena floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Every warrior froze, confused by this apparent surrender. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable slaughter. Sarah smiled. The Krillian champion was the first to move, charging forward with a battle cry that shook the arena's foundations. His massive war hammer, powered by gravitational amplifiers, swung toward where Sarah stood. The weapon could have flattened a building, and its wielder had never missed a target. Sarah wasn't there. She had moved so fast that most spectators saw only a blur. The champion's hammer struck empty air, and his confusion lasted exactly long enough for Sarah's bare hand to make contact with his throat. The touch seemed gentle, almost casual, but the 3-meter giant collapsed instantly, his nervous system shutting down from a precisely applied pressure point technique. The Vorthan assassin struck next, her plasma daggers leaving trails of superheated air as they sliced towards Sarah's position. These weapons had killed hundreds of enemies, and their wielder moved with a fluid grace that made her species legendary among killers. Sarah caught both wrists mid-strike, her human hands somehow resisting the plasma energy that should have incinerated them. She applied a quick twist, and the assassin's weapons clattered to the ground beside their unconscious owner. "Impossible," whispered Subcommander Vextar from his viewing box. "Those daggers cut through everything." The mechanical warrior's targeting systems locked on his Sarah, firing energy bolts that could pierce tank armor. Each shot was perfectly calculated, accounting for every possible evasion pattern. The artificial intelligence controlling the machine had studied thousands of combat scenarios and found optimal solutions for each one. Sarah moved between the energy bolts like she was dancing, her body flowing around each beam with impossible precision. She reached the mechanical warrior in 3 steps, placed her palm against its central processing unit, and somehow sent an electromagnetic pulse through her bare skin that shut down every system instantly. The crowd was no longer cheering. Stunned silence filled the arena as spectators tried to process what they were witnessing. This wasn't combat as any species understood it. This was something beyond their comprehension. 9 warriors remained, and they had all stopped attacking. Fear, an emotion most of them thought they had conquered long ago, crept into their minds as they watched the small human stand among the bodies of their fallen competitors. She hadn't used any weapons, hadn't shown any apparent effort, and wasn't even breathing hard. Sarah looked around the arena, her expression almost sad. "You can all leave if you want," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying to every corner of the massive structure. "I really don't want to hurt anyone else." The Zentoran berserker, whose species knew no fear and felt no pain, let out a war cry and charged with his molecular disruptor raised high. Sarah sighed softly, moved aside at the last possible moment, and the berserker's own momentum carried him into the arena wall with enough force to crack the reinforced structure. 8 warriors left. The remaining 8 warriors formed a circle around Sarah, their weapons trained on her from every angle. The Thuranian shock trooper activated his personal shield generator, creating a barrier that could deflect starship weaponry. The Kellish Psion began gathering mental energy, preparing an attack that had once shattered an entire moon. The crystalline being from Sigma Draconis started vibrating at frequencies that could disrupt molecular bonds. Sarah stood in the center of their formation, still holding her simple metal rod. She looked almost bored. "Coordinate your attacks," growled the Thuranian through his helmet speakers. "Whatever she is, she's still just one being against 8. The Kellish Psion struck first, launching a telepathic assault designed to shut down Sarah's nervous system and leave her brain dead within seconds. The psychic energy was so intense that several spectators in the front rows collapsed from the overflow, their minds unable to handle even the scattered fragments of the attack. Sarah tilted her head slightly, as if listening to distant music. The Psion's eyes widened in shock as his mental probe simply vanished upon contact with the human's mind. It didn't bounce off like hitting a shield, and it wasn't absorbed like striking psychic armor. It just disappeared as if it had never existed. "My turn," Sarah said softly. She moved again, that impossible speed that made her seem to teleport rather than run. The metal rod in her hand became a blur as she struck the Thuranian's shield generator. The device, rated to withstand nuclear explosions, simply crumpled like paper. Her follow-up strike hit the warrior's chest plate with a sound like a small thunderclap, and he flew backward to crash into the arena wall beside the berserker. The crystalline being's molecular disruption field activated, filling the air with energy that should have torn Sarah apart at the atomic level. She walked through it like stepping through a gentle breeze, her cellular structure somehow remaining perfectly intact despite forces that could have unmade a mountain. Her rod touched the crystalline warrior's core matrix, and the being shattered into a million sparkling fragments that rained down across the arena floor. "She's not using any technology," Commander Zethkri observed, his tactical analysis struggling to explain what he was seeing. "No energy weapons, no enhancement drugs, no cybernetic implants. How is this possible?" The Draconian Flamebearer unleashed torrents of plasma, fire hot enough to melt tungsten. The Altarian Ice Warrior countered with absolute zero energy blasts that could freeze atoms solid. The two attacks met around Sarah's position, creating a swirling maelstrom of conflicting temperatures that should have vaporized anything caught between them. Sarah emerged from the chaos completely unharmed, her simple metal rod now glowing with absorbed thermal energy. She flicked the weapon once, and both the Flamebearer and Ice Warrior found their own attacks redirected back at them with doubled intensity. They collapsed simultaneously, victims of their own redirected power. 4 warriors remained: the Hegemony Battle Android, the Void-Touched Assassin, the Quantum Phase Shifter, and the Champion of the Death Worlds. Each represented the pinnacle of their respective civilizations, military technology, and training. Together, they had conquered entire star systems. "We need to retreat," whispered the Quantum Phase Shifter, his form flickering in and out of normal space as fear overcame his concentration. "This isn't a battle anymore. It's an execution." The Void-Touched Assassin's tendrils writhed with dark energy drawn from the spaces between dimensions. "No retreat," he hissed through a mouth that existed in 7 different realities simultaneously. "We end this here, or we lose everything we've built our reputations on." The battle android's computational matrix ran through 1,000,000 combat scenarios in the space of a heartbeat, searching for any tactical advantage. Every projection ended the same way: total defeat within 30 seconds of engagement. The machine's artificial intelligence experienced something it had never encountered before: the desire to flee. Sarah walked slowly toward them, her rod held casually at her side. With each step, the arena's energy readings spiked higher, as if reality itself was bending around her presence. Several of the recording devices malfunctioned, their sensors unable to process the data they were receiving. "I'll give you the same offer," she said, loud enough for the entire arena to hear. "You can leave. No shame in it. Sometimes discretion really is the better part of valor." The Death World Champion, a being that had survived on planets where the very air was poisonous and the ground tried to kill anything that touched it, actually took a step backward. His survival instincts, honed by decades of facing impossible odds, screamed that the human was more dangerous than anything he had ever encountered. The battle android opened fire with every weapon system it possessed: particle beams, plasma bolts, kinetic projectiles, and exotic energy forms filled the air in a concentrated barrage that could have leveled city blocks. The attack was perfectly calculated, covering every possible escape route, and accounting for superhuman reflexes. Sarah didn't dodge. She stood perfectly still as the weapon's fire converged on her position, then raised her simple metal rod. The weapon somehow deflected, absorbed, or redirected every single attack. Energy that should have destroyed her instead flowed around her like water around a stone. When the barrage ended, she was completely unharmed, and her rod now pulsed with accumulated power from the android's own weapons. "My God," breathed the Centaurian diplomat in the VIP section. "She's not just human. She's something else entirely." Sarah pointed her rod at the battle android. A focused beam of its own redirected energy struck the machine's core systems, causing cascading failures throughout its entire frame. Within seconds, the most advanced military android in the galaxy was reduced to smoking scrap metal. 3 warriors left. The Quantum Phase Shifter tried to escape by shifting into alternate dimensional space, but somehow Sarah followed him there, appearing in dimensions that shouldn't have been accessible to any physical being. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted less than 5 seconds across 17 different realities before the phase shifter materialized back in the arena, unconscious and defeated. The Void-Touched Assassin struck with tendrils that existed partially outside normal space-time, attacks that were supposed to be impossible to defend against. Sarah caught each tendril with her bare hands, somehow maintaining grip on substances that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The assassin's scream echoed across several realities as Sarah tied his tendrils into knots and left him tangled on the arena floor. One warrior remained. The Death World Champion stood alone, surrounded by the bodies of 11 fallen competitors. His weapons felt heavy in his hands, and for the first time in his life, he understood why lesser beings spoke of fear. Sarah approached slowly, almost sympathetically, as if she regretted what was about to happen. "Last chance," she offered quietly. "You've survived things that would kill entire armies. Don't let pride make you throw that away." The champion looked around the arena, at the stunned faces of thousands of spectators, at the smoking remains of the most powerful warriors in known space. He thought of his home world, where everything tried to kill you from the moment you were born, where survival was an art form and strength was the only currency that mattered. Then, he looked at Sarah, this small human female who had just dismantled the galaxy's finest fighters without breaking a sweat, and made the first wise decision of his adult life. He dropped his weapons. The arena fell into absolute silence. The Death World Champion's weapons clattered against the floor with a finality that seemed to echo through the souls of every spectator. Sarah nodded respectfully at him, then walked to the center of the arena where her victory should have been declared. Instead, the energy barriers that had contained the fight began to shift and reconfigure. New walls of crackling force divided the arena into sections, and additional platforms rose from hidden compartments beneath the floor. The crowd's confused murmur turned to excited chatter as they realized the true event was just beginning. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications," the announcer's voice boomed with renewed enthusiasm. "What you have witnessed was merely the qualifying round. The human has proven herself worthy to face the true champions of the galactic arena." Sarah's head snapped up, her calm expression shifting to something that might have been annoyance. "That wasn't part of the agreement," she called out to the booth where the arena's administrators sat behind reinforced viewing windows. A massive holographic image appeared above the arena, showing the face of Overlord Thurvex, the hegemony military commander who controlled this sector of space. His reptilian features twisted into what his species considered smile. "Agreements change, human. You have provided excellent entertainment, but now the real test begins. Refuse, and your ship and crew will be destroyed before you can reach orbit." High above the arena, Sarah's teammates watched from the prisoner viewing section. Captain Maria Rodriguez pressed against the transparent barrier, her face tight with worry. "Sarah, don't do it. It's obviously a trap." Dr. James Park, the team's scientist, frantically worked on a small device hidden in his sleeve. "The energy readings from those new platforms are off the charts. Whatever they're bringing in, it's beyond anything we've encountered before." Engineer Tommy Walsh paced like a caged animal. "This is insane. They let her win the first round just to set up something worse. We need to get down there and help her." Sarah looked up at her crew, her friends who had followed her across the galaxy, because they believed in her mission to bring peace between humans and the various alien species. They had already sacrificed so much, and she wouldn't let them suffer because of her decision to accept this challenge. "I'll play your game," she said to Overlord Thurvex's image. "But when I win, my crew goes free and you provide safe passage to neutral space. When you die," the Overlord corrected, "your crew will join you. But should you somehow survive the next challenge, I will consider your terms." The new platforms finished rising, revealing figures that made even Sarah take a step backward. These weren't ordinary warriors or champions. These were legends, beings whose names were whispered in fear across 1,000 worlds. The first platform held Keth Moore, the Worldbreaker, a cybernetic giant who had personally destroyed 17 inhabited planets during the Purge Wars. His body was more machine than flesh, equipped with weapons systems that could crack continental plates. Energy readings from his form suggested he carried enough firepower to level entire cities. The second platform revealed something that shouldn't have existed: a harvester, one of the ancient machines that had nearly exterminated all organic life in the galaxy 2 million years ago. This particular unit had somehow survived the Great Shutdown, and been captured after destroying 3-star systems single-handedly. Its crystalline form pulsed with malevolent intelligence and world-ending technology. The third platform held the most terrifying sight of all. Veldar, the Void Walker, the only being known to have survived direct contact with entities from the dark space between galaxies. His body flickered between dimensions, and reality seemed to bend around him like light around a black hole. Merely looking at him caused several spectators to experience existential terror so profound they required medical attention. "These are not warriors," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the arena despite its normal volume. "These are weapons of mass destruction." "Yes," agreed Overlord Thurvex, his image leaning forward with anticipation. "The 3 most dangerous beings in our custody, each capable of destroying fleets single-handedly. If your human abilities are truly as remarkable as they appear, this should be no problem for you." Sarah looked at each of her opponents, calculating odds and strategies. Against any one of them, she might have a chance. Against all 3 simultaneously, while trying not to cause collateral damage to the thousands of spectators, the mathematics were not encouraging. "The arena's shields have been reconfigured," announced a technical coordinator. "They will now contain any explosions up to planet-killer magnitude. Spectators are advised to activate personal protection fields and prepare for potential evacuation." The crowd's excitement was tinged with genuine fear now. Many began edging toward exits, while others activated emergency teleportation devices. The most dedicated thrill-seekers stayed in their seats, but even they looked nervous. Kethmore stepped off his platform first, each footstep cracking the reinforced arena floor. His optical sensors locked onto Sarah with targeting beams that painted red dots across her position. "Human," his amplified voice boomed across the arena, "your species' time is ending. I will make your death a lesson for all organic life." The harvester began to unfold, its crystalline structure shifting into a configuration designed for maximum destruction. Tendrils of dark energy reached out from its core, testing the arena's barriers and finding them adequate to contain its power. Its voice was the sound of dying stars. "Organic entity designated human will be processed for analysis. Resistance will be overcome." Veldar said nothing, but his presence made reality itself feel unstable. The air around him shimmered with impossible geometries, and several recording devices malfunctioned simply from trying to focus on his form. When he moved, he left brief tears in space-time that took several seconds to heal. Sarah stood in the center of the arena, still holding her simple metal rod. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, something had changed. The calm, almost gentle expression she had worn during the first fights was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "I try to do this the easy way," she said, her voice somehow reaching every corner of the massive structure despite being barely above a whisper. "I offered mercy. I gave chances for surrender. I hoped to prove that humans could solve problems without massive destruction." She looked directly up at Overlord Thurvex's image. "You've made that impossible. When this is over, remember that you chose this outcome." The arena's atmosphere began to change. Energy readings spiked beyond the instrument's ability to measure. The air itself seemed to thicken, as if reality was preparing for something unprecedented. Sarah raised her metal rod, and for the first time began to change. The simple weapon extended, its surface becoming mirror-bright, and patterns of light began flowing along its length like liquid starfire. The weapon hummed with a frequency that resonated in the bones of every spectator, a sound that spoke of power beyond imagination. 14 seconds, Sarah announced clearly. "That's how long this will take." She dropped into a fighting stance that was somehow both perfectly balanced and utterly alien to every martial art known to galactic civilization. The 3 most dangerous beings in the galaxy prepared to attack simultaneously, their combined might enough to sterilize solar systems. Sarah smiled, and this time it wasn't gentle at all. The countdown began. The first second belonged to Kethmore, the Worldbreaker. His massive frame erupted with weapons fire that could have carved through moon-sized asteroids. Plasma cannons, gravitational disruptors, and quantum implosion bombs filled the air with enough destructive force to crack a planet's crust. The arena's reinforced barriers held, barely, but the shockwaves knocked half the remaining spectators unconscious. Sarah moved through the barrage like she was walking through a gentle rain shower. Her transformed weapon cut through reality itself, creating brief windows where the laws of physics bent to her will. Energy that should have vaporized her instead flowed around her in impossible patterns, as if the universe had decided she was too important to die. Second 2. The Harvester joined the attack, its crystalline form unfolding into a nightmare configuration of dark energy projectors and matter disintegrators. The ancient machine had been designed to process entire biospheres, breaking down all organic matter into component atoms for easier consumption. Its weapons had no stun setting, no mercy protocols, only complete and utter annihilation. Sarah's rod extended into a staff that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. She spun it in a complex pattern that created geometric shapes in the air, mathematical equations that existed in 3 dimensions, and somehow convinced the Harvester's weapons to fire at empty space. The machine's artificial intelligence, older than most civilizations, experienced something it had never encountered in 2 million years of existence: confusion. Second 3 brought Veldar into the fight. The Voidwalker's attacks didn't follow normal rules of cause and effect. He struck at Sarah through dimensions that existed sideways to reality, using weapons that were concepts given deadly form. His assault was less an attack and more a fundamental rewriting of the laws of existence around Sarah's position. Sarah laughed. The sound was impossibly joyful in the midst of the apocalyptic battle. She began to dance, her movements flowing between the attacks of 3 beings who had never been successfully challenged. Her staff became a blur of motion that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, deflecting weapons fire that came from directions that didn't have names. By the 4th second, the arena's defensive barriers were failing. Cracks appeared in the energy walls, and emergency evacuation alarms began sounding throughout the massive structure. The few remaining spectators watched in awe and terror as forces capable of ending civilizations clashed in the space of a few dozen meters. Kethmore's targeting systems couldn't lock onto Sarah's position. She moved in patterns that violated several laws of physics, appearing behind him while simultaneously attacking from the front. His armor, forged from the cores of neutron stars, began to show stress fractures under impacts from her seemingly simple staff. The 5th second saw the Harvester attempting to process Sarah's molecular structure directly, extending tendrils that could disintegrate any known material at the atomic level. Sarah caught the tendrils with her bare hands, and impossibly they held. More than that, they began to change color, shifting from dark destruction to brilliant gold as her touch somehow reversed their fundamental nature. Veldar opened rifts in space-time itself, trying to banish Sarah to the empty void between galaxies. The rifts appeared around her like hungry mouths, each one leading to cosmic emptiness where even thoughts would die. Sarah stepped through the first rift and emerged from another, using the Voidwalker's own attacks as a transportation network. 6th second, Sarah's counterattack began in earnest. Her staff struck Kethmore's central processing unit with a sound like reality tearing. The Worldbreaker, who had destroyed planets with his bare hands, staggered backward as his cybernetic systems began cascading failures throughout his massive frame. Sparks erupted from joints that had withstood solar flares. 7th second. The Harvester found its own weapons being used against it as Sarah somehow convinced its disintegration beams to target their source. The ancient machine, which had processed countless worlds, began to consume itself in a feedback loop that turned its crystalline structure into rapidly expanding light. 8th second. Veldar discovered that his dimensional attacks were being redirected back through the void spaces he commanded. The entities that lived in the darkness between realities, which he had thought were under his control, suddenly turned their attention to him instead. His screams echoed across 17 different dimensions as his own allies began to tear him apart. By the 9th second, all three opponents were falling. Kethmore's massive form crashed to the arena floor, his weapons system silent, and his optical sensors dark. The Harvester had been reduced to a pile of inert crystal fragments. Veldar flickered between dimensions desperately, trying to escape the very forces he had summoned. Sarah stood in the center of the destruction, completely unharmed and barely breathing hard. Her staff returned to its simple metal rod form, and she looked up at Overlord Thurvex's projected image with an expression of mild disappointment. 10th second. Is that all? She asked. The 11th second brought new alarms as additional platforms began rising from the arena floor. More champions, more weapons, more impossible beings dragged from the deepest vaults of military research. The Galactic Hegemony was throwing everything they had at this one human female. 12th second. Sarah sighed softly and shook her head. You really don't learn, do you? 13th second. She raised her rod again, but this time something different happened. Instead of transforming the weapon, she simply released it. The metal rod fell toward the arena floor, spinning slowly through the air. 14th second. The rod touched the ground. Reality exploded, not in the sense of destruction, but in the sense of infinite possibilities suddenly becoming manifest. The arena, the platforms, the weapons, the shields, everything within a kilometer radius simply stopped being what it was and became something else entirely. The space where destruction had reigned moments before filled with impossible gardens, crystalline trees that sang with harmonious music, and pools of liquid starlight that reflected universes that might exist somewhere in the infinite cosmos. The attacking champions found themselves standing in meadows of soft grass, their weapons transformed into flowering vines. The emergency alarms became gentle chimes. The cracked barriers became walls of cascading water that showed visions of peaceful worlds where war had never existed. Sarah stood at the center of it all, surrounded by beauty that hurt to look at directly because it was so perfect. She looked tired now, as if the display of power had cost her something significant. 14 seconds, she said to the stunned silence. I told you how long it would take. High above, in what had been the administrative booth, Overlord Thurvex stared at his control panels in disbelief. Every sensor showed the same impossible reading. The human had just rewritten the fundamental nature of reality itself. Not destroyed it, not conquered it, but simply convinced it to become something better. Captain Rodriguez and her crew watched from their viewing area, tears streaming down their faces as they realized what their friend had just accomplished. She hadn't won through violence or destruction. She had won by showing everyone present that there was always another way. But the story wasn't over yet. The 14th second had passed. Chaos had reigned for exactly as long as Sarah had predicted, and now something new was beginning. The transformed arena existed in a state of impossible beauty for exactly 7 minutes before the first delegation arrived. They came through emergency teleportation portals, military commanders, and diplomatic representatives from dozens of species, all drawn by sensor readings that suggested either a new type of superweapon or the emergence of a completely unknown force in galactic politics. Sarah sat cross-legged beside one of the singing crystal trees, seemingly oblivious to the armed figures materializing around the arena's perimeter. Her simple metal rod lay across her knees, once again looking like nothing more than an ordinary piece of equipment. The champions she had defeated were scattered throughout the garden, most of them still unconscious, but breathing peacefully among flowers that definitely hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier. Admiral Kawaiichira of the Centaurian Defense Force was the first to speak, her forearms spread in a gesture of both surrender and amazement. Human entity designated Sarah Chun, I am authorized by the Galactic Council to offer you anything you desire. Name your price for demonstrating this technology to our military research divisions." Sarah looked up with an expression of mild confusion. "What technology?" "I didn't use any technology. The reality manipulation device," insisted General Vrexton, whose cybernetic enhancements were already scanning the area for residual energy signatures. "The weapon that transformed matter at the quantum level. Our sensors detected energy output equivalent to controlled stellar collapse." "Oh, that." Sarah picked up her rod and held it out for inspection. "It's just a piece of metal I found on a derelict freighter." The transformation wasn't from any device. It was from me. The assembled military leaders exchanged glances that managed to convey skepticism, fear, and desperate hope simultaneously. They had come expecting to negotiate for superweapons. Instead, they were being told that a single individual possessed power that exceeded their most advanced technology. Captain Rodriguez and her crew had been released and escorted down to the arena floor, where they approached Sarah with the careful relief of people who had just watched their friend rewrite the laws of physics. Dr. Park immediately began scanning the transformed environment with his instruments, muttering in scientific amazement at readings that shouldn't have been possible. "Sarah," Captain Rodriguez said quietly, "what exactly are you? Because I've served with you for 3 years, and I've never seen anything like what just happened." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking one of the crystal tree's lower branches. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed to age her decades. "Do you remember the colony ship that disappeared during humanity's first expansion? The one that was supposed to establish the settlement on Kepler 442b? "The Columbus," Engineer Walsh said immediately. "Lost with all hands. They said it was destroyed by a spatial anomaly." "Not destroyed. Transformed. The entire ship, all 15,000 colonists, pulled into a dimensional space where the laws of physics work differently, where consciousness and reality intersect in ways your science hasn't discovered yet." Sarah's expression grew distant. "I was 5 years old when it happened. By the time we found our way back to normal space, I was 23, and 18 years of existing in a realm where thought becomes reality had changed me. The military delegations were recording every word, their strategic minds already calculating the implications. If humans could develop this ability naturally under the right conditions, the balance of galactic power would shift dramatically. The others? Dr. Park asked gently. The other colonists? Still there, as far as I know. Still learning, still growing. They chose to stay when the way back finally opened. I chose to come back and try to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy." Sarah stood up, dusting off her simple clothing. "I had hoped to prove that humans could be partners rather than threats, that we could solve problems without massive destruction." Overlord Thurvex's holographic image flickered back to life above the arena, though the reptilian commander looked significantly less confident than he had before the demonstration. "Human Sarah Chun, the galactic hegemony formally withdraws all hostile intentions toward your species. We apologize for the deception regarding this contest." Sarah nodded acceptance, but didn't seem particularly impressed by the apology. "The question now," she said to the assembled representatives, "is what happens next. You've seen what humans might become given the right circumstances. You've seen that we prefer peace to war, creation to destruction. How you respond to that knowledge will determine whether our species has a future together or whether we remain strangers in an infinite universe." Admiral Kawaitiachera was the first to lower her weapons completely. "The Centaurian Defense Force requests formal diplomatic contact with human leadership. We believe our species could benefit from cultural and scientific exchange." General Vrexton was slower to follow suit, his cybernetic mind still processing threat assessments. "The mechanized collective acknowledges human tactical superiority. We withdraw claims to human colonization rights and offer non-aggression pacts." One by one, the other delegations made similar statements. Not because they necessarily wanted peace with humanity, but because they had just watched a single human rewrite reality itself without breaking a sweat. The diplomatic calculations were simple. Either humanity became allies, or humanity became the most terrifying enemy the galaxy had ever faced. "There's something else you should know," Sarah said, as the formal declarations continued. "I'm not unique among humans. The Columbus colonists weren't the only ones to develop these abilities. Earth has been training others, quietly, carefully. We've been preparing for contact with galactic civilization for decades." The implications of that statement sent ripples of shock through the assembled representatives. If there were more humans like Sarah, if Earth had been preparing for this contact, then everything they thought they knew about the small species from Sol 3 needed to be reconsidered. "How many?" asked Admiral Kakachura, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Enough," Sarah replied simply. "But we don't want to conquer anyone. We don't want to rule the galaxy or impose our will on other species. We want what we've always wanted, a place to grow, to learn, to contribute to something larger than ourselves." The garden around them began to fade as Sarah's concentration shifted, the impossible beauty slowly returning to normal arena architecture. But the memory of what they had seen, the knowledge that such transformation was possible, would remain with every witness for the rest of their lives. "The Galactic Council will convene an emergency session," announced a previously silent delegate from the core worlds. "Humanity will be offered full membership status and protection under galactic law. This I pledge on behalf of the Council itself." Sarah picked up her simple metal rod and walked toward the exit, her crew falling into step beside her. As they reached the arena's main doorway, she turned back to address the assembled representatives one final time. 14 seconds, she said with a small smile. "That's all it took to change everything. Remember that the next time someone tells you that peace is impossible or that some problems can only be solved through violence, sometimes the most powerful weapon you can carry is the willingness to put it down." They left the arena to the sound of desperate communication as dozens of military commanders tried to explain to their governments that humanity was no longer a minor species to be ignored or conquered. They were players on the galactic stage now, and the game had completely changed. High above in orbit, the human diplomatic vessel Harmony received priority clearance for immediate departure to neutral space, where representatives from Earth were already preparing for the first formal contact with galactic civilization. The age of humanity's isolation was over. The age of true cooperation was about to begin. And somewhere in dimensional space that existed sideways to reality, 15,000 colonists continued their studies in the arts of peaceful transformation, knowing that their sacrifice had finally borne fruit in ways they had always hoped it would. Sarah Chun, once again just a diplomatic officer in simple clothes carrying a piece of metal, walked toward humanity's future with quiet satisfaction. She had kept her promise. She had shown the galaxy that humans could be something more than just another species fighting for survival. She had shown them that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the wisdom to know when not to use it. Commander Zeth Kree watched the human female through his tactical visor, mandibles clicking in what his species considered amusement. The creature stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by the finest warriors from 12 different worlds. Each fighter carried weapons that could slice through starship hulls, yet this small, pink-skinned being held only a simple metal rod. "Are you certain this is the legendary human warrior?" asked Subcommander Vextar, his 4 arms adjusting various weapons on his belt. "She looks so fragile." The human's name was Sarah Chun, and her reputation preceded her across 3 star systems. Stories spoke of impossible feats, a single human destroying entire fleets, moving faster than sensor equipment could track, and surviving wounds that would kill any other species instantly. But looking at her now, barely reaching chest height on most of the assembled warriors, those stories seemed like elaborate fiction. Sarah stood perfectly still, her weapon held loosely at her side. Her breathing was calm, steady, almost meditative. The arena's energy shields hummed to life, trapping all 13 fighters within a circular space roughly 50 meters across. The crowd of alien spectators filled thousands of seats, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, roars, and telepathic static. Warriors of the Galactic Arena, boomed the announcer's voice through universal translators. Today we witness something unprecedented. 12 champions face one human in combat to the death. Place your bets now, for this match begins in 60 seconds. The betting displays showed overwhelming odds against Sarah. 1,000 to 1 seemed generous to most observers. The Krillian champion, standing nearly 3 meters tall with natural armor plating, flexed muscles that could crush steel. The Vorthan assassin checked her plasma daggers, each one capable of cutting through any known material. The mechanical warrior from Nexus Prime ran diagnostics on weapon systems that had never failed. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 30 seconds, announced the voice. The crowd's noise reached fever pitch. Some spectators had come specifically to see the famous human die. Others hoped to witness something extraordinary, though few believed the stories could possibly be true. The arena's environmental controls adjusted for optimal viewing, and recording devices focused on every angle. 20 seconds. Sarah's grip on her weapon loosened even further. To most observers, it looked like she was about to drop it entirely. The Hellion warrior, whose species prided itself on reading combat intentions through bioelectric fields, frowned in confusion. The human's energy signature was completely calm, showing none of the pre-combat tension expected from any fighter. 10 seconds. The 12 champions took their fighting stances. Weapons powered up, muscles tensed, and predatory instincts sharpened to killing points. The arena's atmosphere crackled with anticipation and barely contained violence. 5, 4, 3, 2. Sarah opened her eyes. For just a moment, they seemed to glow with an inner light that made several spectators lean forward in their seats. Begin. The metal rod fell from Sarah's fingers, clattering against the arena floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Every warrior froze, confused by this apparent surrender. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable slaughter. Sarah smiled. The Krillian champion was the first to move, charging forward with a battle cry that shook the arena's foundations. His massive war hammer, powered by gravitational amplifiers, swung toward where Sarah stood. The weapon could have flattened a building, and its wielder had never missed a target. Sarah wasn't there. She had moved so fast that most spectators saw only a blur. The champion's hammer struck empty air, and his confusion lasted exactly long enough for Sarah's bare hand to make contact with his throat. The touch seemed gentle, almost casual, but the 3-meter giant collapsed instantly, his nervous system shutting down from a precisely applied pressure point technique. The Vorthan assassin struck next, her plasma daggers leaving trails of superheated air as they sliced towards Sarah's position. These weapons had killed hundreds of enemies, and their wielder moved with a fluid grace that made her species legendary among killers. Sarah caught both wrists mid-strike, her human hands somehow resisting the plasma energy that should have incinerated them. She applied a quick twist, and the assassin's weapons clattered to the ground beside their unconscious owner. "Impossible," whispered Subcommander Vextar from his viewing box. Those daggers cut through everything. The mechanical warrior's targeting systems locked onto Sarah, firing energy bolts that could pierce tank armor. Each shot was perfectly calculated, accounting for every possible evasion pattern. The artificial intelligence controlling the machine had studied thousands of combat scenarios and found optimal solutions for each one. Sarah moved between the energy bolts like she was dancing, her body flowing around each beam with impossible precision. She reached the mechanical warrior in 3 steps, placed her palm against its central processing unit, and somehow sent an electromagnetic pulse through her bare skin that shut down every system instantly. The crowd was no longer cheering. Stunned silence filled the arena as spectators tried to process what they were witnessing. This wasn't combat as any species understood it. This was something beyond their comprehension. 9 warriors remained, and they had all stopped attacking. Fear, an emotion most of them thought they had conquered long ago, crept into their minds as they watched the small human stand among the bodies of their fallen competitors. She hadn't used any weapons, hadn't shown any apparent effort, and wasn't even breathing hard. Sarah looked around the arena, her expression almost sad. "You can all leave if you want," she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying to every corner of the massive structure. "I really don't want to hurt anyone else." The Zentoran berserker, whose species knew no fear and felt no pain, let out a war cry and charged with his molecular disruptor raised high. Sarah sighed softly, moved aside at the last possible moment, and the berserker's own momentum carried him into the arena wall with enough force to crack the reinforced structure. 8 warriors left. Sarah picked up her simple metal rod from where she had dropped it,